G'day guys, Mac with you, Circle, and this is Glottkin, Warhammer End Times Part 2, What Broke the Fans. What a horrible name, Glottkin. Really hard to pronounce. I know that sounds silly, but it's one of those words where the more you say it, the harder it gets, like a tongue twister. Glottkin, Glottkin, Glottkin. Ugh. I wish they'd picked a better name, like Bob. Anyway, I originally planned to do one of these books each month for about 5 months. I quickly realised, however, this was pretty much impossible, as it basically took all of the time I had available for recording and creating other content and, things like working on my own armies and actually playing games and doing the things I enjoy. Getting started in the 30k series, for example, is my personal favourite series to work on, contrary to popular belief. And that one takes a bit of time, believe it or not, because tactics and figuring out price points and points values for armies and giving useful information to people, it's a difficult thing. And so analysing, 150 pages of books each month, writing an essay about it and trying to figure out what does and doesn't make sense, trying to cross notes with previous books I've looked at, very difficult, takes up a lot of time, not something I overly enjoy. Now, as with the last episode on this subject, I'm going to go into big spoilers for something that happened 5 years ago. Because I'm going to talk through the story and describe the chain of events, and I'm going to note all the little bizarre things that stand out to me along the way. Because this is what broke the fans, and that's what it's all about. How does this book begin? Well, it starts with a section talking us through everything that's happened in the end times so far, namely Nagash's back to life or unlife. It also talks us through the most convoluted plotline I've ever read, and how he's absorbed the magical wind of death into himself before proceeding to crush the kingdoms of Khemri and subjugate all of the undead forces in that part of the world. The Chaos forces begin to move south. Karl Franz is being impaled by a vampire through the chest in midair and fell to the ground hundreds of meters below, and survived because plot. In his absence, presumed dead by the logical and sane Kurt Helborg, who must have assumed, like the readers, that Karl was fucked after that, the Empire has shockingly become more fractious, with the courts arguing amongst themselves. Now, when I say the courts, I mean the court of the Elector Counts, the colleges of magic, that kind of thing. Because, in the midst of a crisis, it's important to be internally divided. At least in the aftermath of Cannae, the Romans just elected some new consuls and got on with the business of winning the Second Punic War, but hey, it's the Empire, and they're fractious, and you, the reader, needs to be reminded of this, because you're dumb, and if we don't talk about how disunified the Empire is, you'll forget it, because you're dumb. Now, I'm going to do my best to sum up this story, and I want to keep it as short as possible. But it's really hard with these books, because some chapters have nothing happen at all, like chapters 2 and 3 in this book, and then others, like chapter 4, have more happen in them than in 20 years of army books. It's disjointed and it's painful. Please enjoy. Chapter 1, page 7, The Rise of the Glottkin. Now, I like to note down the chapters, what page they're on, and the chapter name when I do these What Broke the Fans for the End Times, so you at home knows where I'm getting my resources from and you can read along. But before I start this chapter, I want to set a scenario up. Back in the 6th edition of Warhammer Fantasy Battles, they created 4 new characters with fleshed out backstories to lead the forces of chaos, and each month in a White Dwarf, they included the backstory to each of these great lords and released the appropriate forces for them. For example, Hageroth, Lord of Khorne, they spoke about how they made the model, what parts they used, and then they did the big Khorne release that month. And the next month would be Melek, the Changer, Lord of Tzeentch. And all the Tzeentch releases were that month. There is Stirkar, Lord of Slaanesh, and lastly, Phaetor, Lord of Nurgle. Archaon had to gain the support of these 4 great lords before his forces would be strong enough and unified in order to lead the assault on the south in the events of Storm of Chaos. Now Phaetor, for his part, he was a peasant living in the Empire, in the very northern part, whose family was struck down by a plague, and he prayed and prayed for them to be saved. Salvation? I don't know where I was going with that, but they were solved. Now, unbeknownst to him, by Nurgle. Now, that didn't really matter because he was not any the wiser for it, and he continued his life as normal. But one day, while he was out hunting, Imperial troops came along and saw his pox-infested and deformed family, and they burned the survivors at the stake, not caring whether or not they didn't carry the disease. Better safe than sorry. Phaetor, coming back upon the scene and seeing all of this, overpowered the Imperial troops, killing them with his bare hands, their weapons barely harming his hulking and deformed mass. He then fled north and was accepted by a tribe called the Wolf Brothers, and after killing their chief, he became the new tribal leader, and they became the greatest of the Nurgle warbands. So, why do I bring this up? Because these 4 characters were clicked out of existence by a money-crazed Games Workshop like a greedy Thanos. You can't sell these 25 mil sized champions for mega cash. This is the end times. This is Nagash and the Mortarks, big $200 characters that are the new craze. And a Lord of Chaos on foot? Or even on a horse? Screw that. Give me your money. We need your new lord. We need a $200 lord. He needs some little lords that hang around with him, and they're each $200. Money, 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 money. Oh, sorry about that. Must have mixed up the wrong script. It happens. Now look. That doesn't sound like Kirby's Games Workshop at all, does it? So, to get back on track, we meet the Glottkin. Now, despite their allegiance to Nurgle, the Glottkin are actually Imperial by blood, the sons of a Nordlander father, Olos Glotz, and his wife, a life mage named Ethra Greenblood. The Glotz came to Norska on a secret mission by living peacefully alongside the Norskins of the fjords and the Sea of Claws, showing them the healing arts of the Wind of Life and more advanced methods for coaxing successful crops. They hoped to slowly break the chains of hatred that compelled the incessant cycle of raids and retaliations, like Jesuit missionaries. For some time, the two were welcome, becoming quite influential in the area. But a jealous Nausicaan hag cut Ethra's finger with a cursed and rusty knife during her pregnancy with her sons. Unable to break the hag's curse herself, Ethra pleaded with the gods to spare her children, and Nurgle took pity, curing the infection and allowing for the birth of 3 healthy boys, Otto, Ethrak, and Gurek. Each was healthy and hearty, the only sign of their future a birthmark with 3 lobes that each bore on their body. The efforts of the couple were doomed when a Nordlander force came to the Fjordlinger tribe in 2506. The Glotz took up arms to defend their friends and neighbours, and the brothers saw their parents murdered by the Imperials. From that moment on, their souls belonged to Nurgle. Wait a minute, that's the same fucking story as Phaetor. Oh, Games Workshop. You just stole the entire existing character and modified it to suit a gigantic new monster. Guess that little bit at the start of the chapter seems pretty prophetic now, hey? So anyway, Archaon gets a vision from Nurgle, and it's basically a win-win message. If he gains the aid of the Glottkin, he can send them to invade the Empire. If they win, Archaon has it easy, because the Empire's beaten. If they lose, they're going to be catastrophically damaged and crippled by the attacks, in which case, Archaon has it easy. Now, if this isn't the simplest decision to make, then I don't know what is. So, not being totally retarded, Archaon decides to send Nurgle's current favourite champions, the Glottkin, to ally with the Pox Maggoth Riders and the Plague Fleet of Gutrot Spume to launch a 3-fold naval invasion of the Empire. They attack the port city of Marienburg, which is a long way from the Chaos Wastes, but somehow they reach it, and with the Deus Ex Machina precision, they use mould and moss powers to crumble the city walls. They make a point of noting how the walls were made by dwarves with all their skill and such, and yet it crumbles away to dust. To me, this seems more like a vampire power, atrophy, whilst the power of Nurgle is stagnation. But whatever, anything to let the story happen, right? At this point, a vampire army appears on the horizon. Except in the next paragraph, they were summoned from under the streets and the cellars of the town. Consistency? What's that? This army then proceeds to blender-fuck their way into Glottkin's forces, until the vampire in charge is picked up by Gurk, the giant Glottkin monster, and thrown into the sea, which Phantom Menace shuts down the entire army of the dead. So I guess necromancy is actually based on proximity and a lack of water, rather than a lack of other vampires necromancers now. Anyway, at this point, the forces of Marienburg come back for round 2, after sitting out the Undead versus Glottkin fight. Marienburg's forces of course lose, because, well, anything for the plot, and supposedly this is due to the number of their enemies, despite the fact that it takes a really, really long time to launch amphibious assaults. Even in the 20th century, it's really hard to land troops ashore. On D-Day 1944, as an example, only 156,000 troops are landed, and that was with the largest naval force in history, an invasion fleet which was drawn up from 8 different navies comprising 6,939 vessels, including 1,213 warships, 4,126 transport vessels, which included landing ships and auxiliary landing craft, 736 ancillary craft, and 864 merchant vessels. The Glottkin, on the other hand, stormed that many troops through the ruined wall of a city, not the entire coast of Normandy, but through one gap in the wall of a city, from some sailing ships. See, I know it's always dangerous to equate real life with a fantasy book, but that's so fucking dumb. Their own ships would be blocking the way for new ships to come in and land troops. Forget it. Chapter 2, page 37, The Journey South. This chapter, I'd like to title, Nurgle Fights Goblins for 18 pages. Nobody of note is involved, no consequences of note occur, and nobody important dies. Conclusion. Not required in this story. Chapter 3, page 57, The Deluge of Telebheim. Another chapter, another battle. Epidemius, and a Maggoth rider versus No-Name McGee and his Imperial troops. Shockingly, No-Name McGee and the Empire loses the battle, and the surviving Imperial forces retreat to Altdorf, where Festus is brewing potions in the sewers under the city like an infected Ninja Turtle. Another chapter, not required in the story. Chapter 4, page 81, The Fall of Altdorf. So, Nurgle makes it rain disease rain on Altdorf. Now, I can't come up with a catchy nickname for it here, but it basically corrupts everything it touches, growing Nurgle trees in the streets and things like that. It's a thing, I guess. Now, this again is Chaos being omnipotent, where they can just affect the reality of the world with such ease that you wonder why they didn't just lead off with that tactic. Why they even need mortal followers in the first place. Just start your poison rain up there in the north of the world, and then just gradually move it south, and extend the Garden of Nurgle. Seems easy enough. Anyway, Willem Leoncoeur, the former king of Bretonnia, who's now the paladin leading the forces or some such, he pulls a Rohan from Lord of the Rings and rocks up at Altdorf, ready to charge the rear of the forces besieging Minas Altdorf, because Games Workshop is nothing if not original. Festus releases his potions along with Nurgle's rains, and the whole of Altdorf starts to be consumed by the corruption. Whilst the forces of the Empire and Bretonnia fight the Glottkin in the fields below, at this, the darkest hour, Vlad von Carstein is back, with a vengeance. He and his undead forces also attack the forces of Nurgle. Did I mention they made Vlad an Elector Count? Yes, they made a visibly craven vampire lord who's been their mortal enemy for centuries, an Elector Count. And I guess it's a thing now. Now, there's some good in this chapter. Vlad attacks Festus with a jagged piece of wood and his sword. Festus naturally blocks the sword, thinking nothing of the piece of timber now lodged into his chest. But as Festus' power, his superpower as it were, is that of life, he turns the splinter of wood into a full-sized tree, which expands and tears him apart into a burst of grey ectoplasm. Now, I swear, if there was more creative writing like this in the book, I'd have been a lot happier with it. This is a legitimately smart move on the character of Vlad's behalf. It's not just the mindless, they charge, we countercharge of every other battle in this book. It's like the cherry on the ice cream. It just sucks that the ice cream, being the rest of this book, is flavoured shit. The Emperor Karl Franz returns to the story at this point, noting how Vlad is the only thing standing between Nurgle winning and him losing. Vlad takes on Otto Glott, the elder of the Glottkin, and impales the Nurgle Lord with his blade. Now the downside here is that his blade drinks from his enemies, and the corrupted Nurgle blood Vlad drinks takes him out of the fight. All I have to say here is that the forces of Nurgle, we know they don't care being impaled, slashed, any of that sort of thing. We've seen it battle after battle after battle, and Vlad knows this too. So how about instead of stabbing them, Vlad, next time, use that Initiative 8 vampire speed you got, and just cut his fucking head off! As per Marvel's Infinity War, go for the head. Now, Karl Franz, Deathclaw, Kurt Helborg, they all fight Otto and Gurk. Deathclaw is beaten down, and Kurt cops a lance through the face. Snap. With another click Games Workshop's fingers, there goes a beloved character. Franz, he loses an arm, but continues to fight because the severing of a brachial artery is nothing really. Franz is eventually disarmed, forgive the pun, and stabbed through the heart, but shouts the name of Sigmar and is suddenly empowered, brought back to life with Gal Maraz in hand, and kills both Otto and Gurk. Apparently, the winds of heaven, as in the entire magical law, has entered his body, and the energy radiating from him undoes the spells wrought by the forces of Nurgle in a Deus Ex Machina moment, and purges the forces of Nurgle and the undead from the city. Vlad, of course, having walked off to vomit somewhere, is spared from this fate. We also treated to the revelation in the last couple pages that the gods Tal, Shalia, and Ulrich are real, and live like the gods of ancient Greece somewhere, which surely is such a trivial thing that it merits only getting 3 paragraphs of coverage in the middle of this book. Just a minor revelation, that. And at 125 pages, that's it for all the story in Glottkin. So, as a much shorter book than Nagash. Okay, it's a lot more concise. It's less factions involved. In this case, it's only the Empire, Vlad's Undead, and the Glottkin. And some real minor Bretonian stuff in there. That's a lot less convoluted than the previous book, which is great. The problem? It's 90% filler. And frankly, if they'd kept the original 4 champions of Chaos, Hargaroth, Melek, Stirikar, and Phaetor, they could have made a story revolving around a chapter each for each of those gods' forces, showing their unique strength as they attack the Empire, perhaps each laying waste to a region of the Empire before being beaten back individually, going to show how the forces of Chaos do need to work together in order to win. And all under Archaon's leadership. You know, it would set up other books, and that would have resulted in far less filler, not having required the contrived, here comes some last-minute allies to save the day, all those stupid plots. It would have made for a far more thematic story. Also, this book introduced the Glottkin, and we lost them in the same book. We also lost Festus the Leech Lord, Luther Huss, and Volton. They just disappear into the nether of, oh, we forgot they existed when we wrote the book. Kurt Helborg is lanced through the face. How great. It's got problems. Now, there's one other thing that really frustrates me, however. And when I read these books, I'm just reminded of it. I've wanted to talk about it for a while now. And I know applying real-life knowledge to a fantasy realm is never a good idea. But guys, I need to get this off my chest. There is always going to be a plot contrivance, of course, in any story, that the bad guy can stack the odds against you. My problem is that not only do the forces of chaos seem to have limitless numbers, but they seem to thrive and reproduce in a land of ice and snow, the chaos wastes. You see, in real life, the Vikings raided outside of Scandinavia because there wasn't enough to go around. Not just for the sake of raiding people. War is dangerous. It's profitable, but it's dangerous. And in the Warhammer world, the kingdoms like the Empire, located in fertile, temperate climates with sizable governments, relative stability, where the next door neighbours aren't going to potentially attack and wipe them out every single winter, well, they should probably have a slight population edge over the forces of chaos. And by slight, I of course mean thousands of times more population. Whilst many can argue that the Empire is beset by foes, greenskins, Skaven, vampires, etc., Chaos actively is fighting the Dark Elves in Book 1, with roughly all of Khorne's followers engaged in that scuffle, which is about, at a guess, a fifth of the Chaos forces. They're also fighting forces over in Cathay in the east, which is basically China versus Mongols 2.0. They're also fighting greenskins in the Ashen Wastes along with the Chaos Dwarves, and feuding amongst each other continuously for food, land, and slaves. And this is yearly too, the whole infighting thing, whilst the Empire has great periods of stability, and only seems to have a great battle every 50 years or so. Usually on their off years it's the undead, and on the other years it's Chaos, the greenskins. That's how it goes. So how come Chaos has such never-ending numbers of their physically superior troops with which to assault the technologically and numerically far superior Empire? Dumb writing. Why do I bring this up in a fantasy setting? Because other authors like Tolkien gave us the whole eastern half of his world for Sauron to use with which to raise his armies, and he played up how crippled the kingdoms of men are after millennia of war. In the Warhammer world, Chaos's mortal servants appear from nothing. They have everything and can overpower the superior empire with seeming ease, time after time. When they are beaten, it should take a lot more than 2 centuries for the forces of the north to rebuild their shattered population. Think of Sweden and their wars against Russia and Poland in the 1600s. They were the better force, like Chaos, but the numbers game was on Poland and Russia's side, which are like the Empire in this analogy. The forces of Sweden weren't that much better than their enemies, so to grossly oversimplify history, they lost. And they couldn't come back and rebuild their Swedish Empire because their population was shattered and the resources weren't there, and the southern forces facing them were so numerically strong, namely places like Prussia and Russia in the late game. The X factor here is of course the demons and the demonic forces of Chaos, but the forces of good also have their own spellcasters, magical beasts, and of course powerful allies, such as the High Elves and Dwarves to call upon. So the argument that I make here is that, fundamentally, these books are flawed, just from the perspective of Archaon's forces being so huge that he can launch a campaign which is chunks of his forces in multiple parts of the world at once, and that said forces are capable of totally dominating entire factions of enemies, whether they be Dark Elves, Greenskins, Cathay, or the Empire, until such time as the author decides otherwise. That's stupid, because if Chaos is so strong and omnipotent, and I was Archaon, I'd have just made a beeline straight into the fucking Empire with everything I have. Let the Dark Elves and the High Elves fight each other in their own little war in the West. I'm bringing a force at least 5 times the size of the Glottkin invasion, and I'm going to absolutely win this war through divide and conquer, instead of trying to fight everyone at once. Why didn't this happen? Because the story would be over in 5 minutes, and that's just not cool and epic enough for Games Workshop to drag out over 5 books, knowing that within a year of starting the series, they're going to destroy utterly the world, and many of the factions within which this was set. This is the second in a 5-part series where I will look over the end times, and I have to say, it has been even worse the second time round. These books are lovely to look at. There is some nice art here, even if a lot of it is reused. These books are gorgeous, but as per the first episode, the content within is in such a sorry state that I cannot positively recommend them. If you do like them, however, that's entirely up to you. I will not take that away from you, as I am no arbiter of taste. I'm just some guy on the internet who likes to analyse things. Thank you all for watching this episode, and I'll see you all next time.